This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen begins today's show as he continues to review major things that happened in 2023 that impacted agricultural law and taxation. We continue the show with K-State's A.J. Tarpoff and Jason Warner and family medicine doctor Ron Varner to remind people about trying to keep themselves and their livestock safe during these frigid weather conditions. K-State Research and Extension Floral Design Specialist Irina Sheshukova discusses a new master floral design program for flower consumers to end today's show. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show continuing to review ag law and tax developments in 2023. And to talk about it, we're once again joined by K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, Shelby.
Talking about 4 developments from 2023, and the first one talking about the scope of the Dealer Trust Act. And what is the Dealer Trust?
Well, it was enacted in late 2020 as an amendment to the Packers and Stockyards Act. And, of course, the Packers and Stockyards Act applies to transactions involving livestock and poultry in interstate commerce that involves a covered packer or dealer or market agency or swine contractor or live poultry dealer. But the Packers and Stockyards Act basically applies to the larger operations. And there's always been an attempt, I shouldn't say always, in recent years there have been attempts to modify the Packers and Stockyards Act to provide protection to unpaid cash sellers of livestock to the smaller packers or feeders and brokers and small processors. And that's what the Dealers Trust Act is. What it does is it puts unpaid cash sellers of livestock ahead of that buyer's prior perfected security interest holders. So it's a provision like the trust that exists for unpaid cash sellers of grain to a covered grain buyer. And that was the whole purpose of the law, is to provide protection to farmers and ranchers that sell covered products to these relatively smaller buyers.
And there was a case that made it to court in 2023 that deals with the dealer trust.
Yeah, that's right. We've got the first test case that is going to test the scope of what the Dealer Trust Act is in terms of what is included in that trust. And that's a big issue because if your buyer files bankruptcy and you are an unpaid cash seller, you're going to go to the back of the line. You're probably not a secured creditor. You didn't file a UCC Article 9 security agreement, and so you're not secured. And so if they file bankruptcy, the secured creditors, such as that buyer's lender, is going to get paid before you do. And there may not be anything left in the bankruptcy estate to pay you. And so what this does is it holds your funds. The idea is your funds that you're entitled to in a trust separate from the bankruptcy estate. And what the case involves is the issue of exactly what is the scope of the act in terms of what is going to be included in that trust that would be available for those unpaid cash sellers and what is in the bankruptcy estate of the bankrupt feed yard or processor, for example.
So planning to see actually what that scope is in 2024?
Yeah, and it's a big issue because there's a lot of money involved here. There's about $122 million in unpaid claims against 3 defunct cattle operations. And there's also a lender, a major ag lender, that says one of the feed yards sold about 78,000 head of cattle and didn't pay on the loan. And what these feed yards got into was a Ponzi scheme to the tune of about $175 million, a check-kiting scheme. And so this is the aftermath of that, and the courts are hopefully going to sort out who gets paid what, and we should know the scope of the Dealer Trust Act in 2024.
And Roger, another development in ag law and taxation from 2023, a case involving equity theft out of Minnesota.
Yeah, this is a case that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and resulted in a unanimous opinion from the court in 2023. And you're right, it came out of the Minneapolis area, Hennepin County, and there was a homeowner in Hennepin County that failed to pay property taxes, and the county followed state law and ultimately sold the property at public auction to pay the taxes. Well, that's fine. However, the county then kept the entire sale proceeds and didn't give back to the homeowner the amount above the taxes that she was obligated to pay. So in other words, they didn't just keep the amount that they were entitled to for payment of late real estate taxes and fines and interest and those types of things. They kept the entire amount. And her argument was, well, I'm entitled to my equity in the property. You can't keep that. And the Supreme Court agreed, and it was unanimous. And this is an issue that some states have, and they're going to have to retool their statutes in light of the Supreme Court's opinion.
And another case really important from 2023, customer loyalty rewards and really creating maybe a tax issue for some companies.
Yeah, that's right. This is a big case involving a non-ag company, it's Hyatt Hotels Corporation. But many companies, including agribusinesses and retailers, they utilize these customer loyalty programs as a means of keeping and attracting customers. And we deal with this just about on a daily basis. So there's so many of these programs out there. You go buy gas, and you're asked, do you have rewards? You go to a hardware store. You go to any type of ag country store, for example, to buy products for your farm. And they'll ask you, well, are you a rewards member? Well, yeah. Well, if so, then you can build up credit that will allow you to redeem those points. And once you get to a certain threshold, you might be able to buy an item from that retailer, or you can use them as a discount on a subsequent purchase. You might get a certain amount off per gallon of gas, for example. And sometimes they come in the mail to you as a coupon, and you can redeem your reward points that way. Well, the question in Hyatt Hotels was whether the parent organization that has all of these associated hotels, and we can think of it also as an agribusiness that's got retail outlets, they create a fund in which the participating hotels in this instance contribute money, and they get reimbursed out of that fund when a customer redeems their reward points. Well, Hyatt Hotels, the parent corporation, is managing that fund, but they're not reporting the income in that fund. They're not reporting the income from the investments that they make based on the income in that fund, and they're not deducting any expenses when they pay amounts out of that fund to reimburse participating member hotels. And the IRS didn't like that, and the tax court agreed that they said, Hyatt, you maintain too much control over that fund. You're not able to claim that that is not included in income. It is. So that's a major, major case, and I think that has implications for a lot of retailers, including agribusiness retailers, that may not be doing this correctly from a tax standpoint.
So what are a few things that people need to think about to hopefully do it correctly?
Well, they have to watch how much control they exercise over the fund out of which the participating members are being reimbursed. And that was really the key to the case. The control that they had retained in this instance made the argument impossible for them to say that they were just a trustee of the fund. They were just kind of managing it, but they're not exercising control over it. They were. There is an exception out there known as the trust fund doctrine established in a case involving 7-Up back in 1950. But that didn't apply in this instance because of all of the control that the parent company had over that fund. So it's a good case in terms of laying down a marker for those that are giving tax advice to clients that offer these customer loyalty reward programs. And the retail businesses that offer these and participate in these will want to ensure that their program is structured in a way that fits within this trust fund doctrine, the exception under that for excluding program funds from gross income. So I think it's a big case on the tax side of things.
And Roger, one last thing for us to talk about today, basis of assets contained in an intentionally defective grantor trust. And what is an intentionally defective grantor trust, and why might someone want something that is defective?
It's an estate planning technique for a very unique type of clientele, usually the wealthier clientele, so a large farming and ranching operation with a lot of wealth. It's a good estate planning technique that we can use as a succession planning transition type device. And what it is it's an irrevocable trust that has language in it that makes sure that the individual grantor, the person creating the trust, pays any income tax on the property that's contained in the trust. So you might transfer farm or ranch land to an intentionally defective grantor trust or other types of property. And if that generates income, you're still going to pay the income tax on that, even though you've transferred the property away from you and have gotten it out of your estate at the time of death. And that's the idea here. So some would say, well, why would I want to do that? It's effective for estate tax purposes. It's defective for income tax purposes because even though I transferred all the property away and it's a separate tax entity, normally it's a separate tax entity, but here I still pay the tax on it. Well, the idea is that the grantor is from the wealthier generation. They have the money. and they're trying to move that property to the next generation. Well, let's not burden the next generation with the tax on it. I'll still pay the income tax on it so that farm or ranch land, that farm property that I've transferred away, continues to appreciate tax-free, in essence, in the hands of my beneficiaries. And so that's the whole idea behind it. The question that has been out there for a number of years, and the IRS finally answered it in 2023, was when that grantor dies, do the assets in that trust get a basis increase equal to fair market value at the date of the grantor's death? Do they get a stepped-up basis in the hands of the beneficiary? In other words, is the retained obligation to pay income tax on the income generated by the assets in the trust, even though I've transferred them away from me, is that enough to cause inclusion in my estate to get a basis step-up in the hands of my heirs?
And Roger, what did the IRS say?
Well, they had vacillated on this for about 15 years. They'd gone back and forth. But finally, in 2023, they issued a revenue ruling, which is official policy of the IRS, saying that, no, you do not get a basis increase in the hands of the beneficiaries of that trust and those assets that are in that trust. So we're going to have to think about this in terms of its implications for estate plans where we have created intentionally defective grantor trusts. We now know that there won't be a basis increase in the hands of the beneficiaries.
Where can people read more about these cases, Roger?
They can go to my website and access my blog from the homepage of my website. It's Washburnlaw.edu/WALTR, or they can also find it on AgManager through the Department of Ag Econ.
That was K-State and Washburn Law Professor Roger McEowen. The resources that he mentioned will be linked in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and I wanted to continue our show now by resharing some important topics related to livestock and human safety and care in the cold. I hope everyone is staying as warm and safe as possible and caring for yourselves, loved ones, and livestock. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to do this as being an agricultural producer. We're now going to be joined by K-State Extension Beef Veterinarian AJ Tarpoff. AJ, as we're thinking about animals being in the cold, what are a few things that people might want to think about in terms of protecting their animals from cold stress?
It's not just about the temperature. We got to think about wind speed. We got to think about, the temperature, the moisture, all of these things kind of play into a key role that all of those things impact our animals. This winter in particular, we're going to have more moisture, more moisture than what we've had the last several years. So that's a good thing, but also a concern when we start looking about cold stress. So how do we modify the environment? We can't control the weather, but how do we modify the environment to increase cattle comfort during these events? My first and foremost is bedding, whether it's wheat straw, whether it's corn stalks, any type of some of that spent forage material that's not going to be nutritional value, we can use as bedding. It provides a thermal layer to the ground where animals have a comfortable area to be able to lay down, bed up. They're protected from that frozen ground, and it gives them a nice area to get out of the wind, get out of some of those elements. So yes, it's an expense to be able to put it out, to be able to pay for those things, but it does pay off in the end. For our newborn baby calves, again, they're being born into a very cold environment. So we want to have them in a protected area, hopefully with a windbreak. Wind and moisture are the two key elements we want to control for our cow-calf herds. So whether it's a portable windbreak or you actually calve in a protected site in some trees or a shelter belt, however that looks, I personally like movable windbreaks. We can move in different areas so we can control where we feed our animals. We can spread some of those contaminants, over a much larger area. However you do it, just make sure we want a windbreak and have a good bedded area for those newborn baby calves to get up, get dry, get that first nursing milk, and get off to a good start.
So is getting food in their belly something really important for cold stress?
Food is critical for cold stress, regardless of how big the animal is. A newborn absolutely needs that first colostrum very early in life and to continue nursing to keep up that readily available energy level, because the body, it takes a lot of energy to produce heat. For our cows and for our production animals, all that energy that we're feeding them, it increases their maintenance energy requirements. So instead of growth, instead of lactation, all those extras, they are using the majority of what we're feeding them just to maintain body temperature. So that means whenever it gets cold, maybe we have some higher levels of energy, some better quality hay for our cows. Maybe we have, we change our rations a little bit in the feedlot to make sure they're getting all the energy requirements that they need, because we know they're spending a huge amount of energy just trying to stay in normal body temperature.
Are there a few signs of cold stress?
There are. The behavioral changes, especially for a newborn, I don't trust. That's where having a thermometer, using a rectal thermometer and actually seeing what the internal temperature is the best indicator. Carry a thermometer in their calving kit, because if they have a hypothermic calf, it's a quick, easy test and say, hey, this calf needs a little extra help. Normal body temperature for a newborn baby calf should be 101 to 102-ish degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if it drops below 100, that's already in mild hypothermia or low body temperature. So intervention, drying them off, putting them on the floorboard of your pickup with the defrost so they can get some, warm, dry air circulating around them, however you do that. But anything below 100 degrees Fahrenheit, they can use a little extra bump.
If people would like to kind of keep track of cold stress, is there a tool available for them?
There is. So, regardless of your plan, regardless of your operation, cold stress hits us all. So planning ahead and monitoring the conditions is really important. Thankfully, our Kansas Mesonet here at K-State, we have an animal comfort index. Okay, and that comfort index, usually we're talking about heat stress with the Mesonet, but it crosses heat and cold. So it takes into all those different parameters of wind speed and solar radiation, humidity levels, and temperature, and really puts it into a model to show how that cold temperature is impacting our animals. So use the Mesonet Animal Comfort Index to plan ahead. We have a forecasting tool that's available with that as well, so we can look out several days in advance and say, hey, we have not just how we feel or what we see on the regular TV, but guess what? We can look at the Mesonet and see how that temperature and how that environmental temperature at a local level is impacting our animals, and we can plan accordingly.
That was K-State Extension beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff. We're now going to be joined by K-State Extension cow-calf specialist Jason Warner. Jason, as we're thinking about these cold temperatures, is there anything specific we need to think about for bulls?
Well, the big thing that we're always concerned about when we have severe cold stress and particularly time periods where we've got a lot of ice and frozen ground is frostbite and the potential negative impact that can have on semen quality. And we routinely will see that every year in the early spring as we're coming out of wintertime. And we know that we've got issues, or we can often see issues with bulls. And it's just really important to be thinking about providing some bedding for those bulls and also some wind protection. And so depending on what the management situation is, how those bulls are maintained, particularly if it's maybe a smaller trap pasture or a dry lot area that doesn't have a lot of residual forage cover on that surface of the ground, if bulls are going to be maintained in areas where we've got a lot of bare ground, we really want to be thinking about making sure that we're providing ample bedding, particularly when we get into real extreme situations where we've got lots of cold temperature, lots of wind stress, just to make sure that we're protecting those bulls. Because if it's severe enough, it can certainly negatively impact their ability to pass a breeding soundness exam, and so we want to make sure that we're thinking about those things as well.
That was K-State cow-calf extension specialist Jason Warner. Now, wanting to remind people it's also important to care for themselves, we're joined by family medicine doctor Ron Varner. Ron, as people are thinking about caring for themselves, frostbite is something that they need to keep an eye on. And what is frostbite?
Frostbite is when, believe it or not, ice crystals form in the tissues, and when that happens, then you can actually clot off small blood vessels, get thrombi in the small blood vessels. Usually it's painful at first, and sometimes even the pain diminishes over time. They just become, if you will, numb. What you want to do is re-warm the extremities, which is usually where the frostbite is, in warm water, as warm as you can stand it, and it may take up to 30 minutes before the tissue begins to revitalize. And you can always tell by the distal part, the furthest part, which is usually your fingers or toes, you want them to return to like normal flushing, where you push on it and you would get return circulation. In the field, if you get your hands wet or toes wet, get away from any wet clothing and get on dry clothing. I know I usually advise farmers in the wintertime to take extra gloves and extra clothes just in case they would get wet, because wet and cold are not good. That hastens frostbite.
And is wet and cold also a concern for people maybe getting hypothermia?
That is true. Hypothermia is usually defined by your core temperature drops below 95 degrees. The symptoms, first symptoms are shivering and poor judgment, loss of coordination. As it progresses, if it gets more extreme, shivering stops, and that's always a good warning sign. When the shivering stops, you're in big trouble. Your heart rate slows down, your pupils dilate, you have loss of coordination and lethargy. In fact, I've heard of cases, I've never encountered this, where you find somebody that's hypothermic and they don't want to leave the cold environment because they feel comfortable. Well, obviously their judgments is impaired and their core temperature is impaired. The treatment for that is just rewarm as quick as you can. That's one case where it's good to get up, move around, slap your arms, get the circulation going to restore your normal core temperature. In extreme cases, you have to be transported to the emergency room. They give IV fluids and try to resuscitate you back up to a normal core temperature. If not, it proceeds to coma and then eventually to death. And it comes on a lot quicker than what people would think.
So really, is that just watching yourself and hopefully being with somebody while you're out in the cold?
Yes. The key to that, too, is like when you're cold and shivering stops, you're in big trouble.
So being mindful of yourself there, and also probably important to be mindful of what you're doing when you're walking on ice.
That's true. I always tell people, trust your feet, not your eyes. Where I water our cattle, the ground's all pockmarked from them walking around. You can't really see the ice in some of those holes. If it feels slick, it is slick. And just be extremely careful with that. Like I always tell them, trust your feet, not your eyes.
Should people try to catch themselves or maybe just hopefully gracefully fall?
It depends, kind of. I mean, if you can gracefully fall, that's great. But most falls that occur on slippery surfaces just happen quickly. And, you probably should relax and go with the fall. But like I said, it happens so quickly, most people don't have time to react.
And I know in the winter, I like hopping into a warm car or being warm in my house. However, taking into account carbon monoxide is really important this time of year.
That's true. And there's, they make those kits you can check for carbon monoxide, but, a lot of times you don't know. What I tell farmers and ranchers, if they're in a tractor or a vehicle, keep the window cracked a little bit, even if it's extremely cold, to get some fresh air in there. Carbon monoxide poisoning, you get lethargic and, the next thing you're unconscious.
Ron, is there any other big key things you'd like to tell producers or people to remember when it comes to cold weather?
Well, I just have 3 simple things I tell them. Keep warm, keep dry, and keep moving. Keeping warm obviously explains itself. Keeping dry, get rid of wet clothes as quick as you can because that hastens hypothermia and can hasten frostbite. And keep moving. By keeping moving, you stimulate circulation to all the muscles and tissues and maintain your core temperature at normal.
That was Ron Varner, a doctor in family medicine. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. The 2024 Kansas Garden Hour started the year with information on floral design. From a master floral design program for flower consumers to a demonstration on how to arrange flowers from the grocery store. The webinar was presented by K-State Research and Extension Floral Design Specialist Irina Sheshukova. She admits that it's hard to fit everything into a 1-hour webinar.
I was slightly concerned about this because it's not possible to teach a floral design in 45 minutes. So the plan is to go over some slides regarding the floral design and why we're doing this. And the end of it would be a presentation on how to make a specific floral design. So what is a floral design? That is a professional description of it. Floral design is the art of using flowers and other materials and creating pleasing, balanced composition. And just remember, for sure, flowers are beautiful, they're playful and romantic, but they have a deeper meaning and purpose in our life. We use flowers for just any occasions. Valentine's Day is coming up in a month. It's going to be pretty crazy everywhere, especially in floral shops. We're using flowers for weddings, for birthday, for anniversaries, for sad occasions, such as funerals. But still, we are looking for that gift as a gift of flowers. And studies have shown that having fresh flowers nearby can help boost creativity and enthusiasm and actually reduce stress and anxiety. Since we're talking about floral design, I thought maybe it would be a good idea to introduce you Master Floral Design program for floral consumers. This Master Floral Design program, it's new and it's kind of similar to master programs in extension, but this one has a focus purely on floral design. We are collaborating with Mississippi State University because they have established floral design program. It has 3 phases. The first phase is 100% online learning. Second phase is 100% learning in person, meaning hands-on activities. And phase number 3 consists of volunteering. The phase number 1, it's a theory. It has 14 weeks in a course, and technically that will follow the length of a normal college course. And it has 53 videos, more than 18 hours of learning. And of course, you will learn how to work with flowers, post-harvest care, so preparation flowers for designing, mechanics, tools, designing principles and elements, history of floral design. So all those necessary elements we need to know before we start designing. The phase number 2, it is phase when you come per se here and learn in person how to design. So that's going to be 4 days of hands-on practice. You don't have to bring anything because all tools, flowers, containers, necessary accessories will be included in the fee. So that's going to be all designing. And phase number 3, it's a volunteering. If anyone would like to get a certification, so you actually need to gain 20 hours or volunteering, non-profit volunteering. Technically, if you help designing in community spaces or in churches or nurseries, nursing homes, some garden clubs, or you can teach somebody how to design or help assist extension program. So definitely there are plenty of possibilities how to gain those 20 hours of volunteering.
That's K-State Research and Extension Floral Design Specialist Irina Sheshukova with information on floral design. To view the webinar, search for Kansas Garden Hour. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.